Welcome to the Live Alive podcast.
Isn't it weird that, people can hear us but can't see us?
Yes, and they can hear us in the future, not the present.
Right. We could be doing anything right now, just host. I could literally have no pants on.
Who's to say you don't?
Yeah. No one will know. It's like working from home. You just dress your top half because you're doing a Skype call with the boss, but they don't know. You're in your boxers below and your slippers.
And you could be at the beach.
Yeah, that's true. We're in a black space right here. No one knows what's behind the curtains.
There could be $1 million behind that curtain.
We could be in jail. There's just black
special privileges.
Black bed sheets. Or on some cool prisoner program. But we're doing it. Don't ask us about our past, though. We don't want to talk about it.
Well, we'll get into Chad's past. That's more fun.
Yeah, that's more fun.
Actually, Chad got into his past, which was pretty awesome. In fact, I've read his book now, and it was really refreshing how honest he was. And just how relatable.
Yeah.
Which I think is one of the most important qualities of someone who follows Jesus.
To me, the number one thing that marks a male Christian in American society is humility, which then leads into relatability. So I met him briefly. I wasn't with you guys when you interviewed him, but I met him afterwards. And he was a really authentic, honest person, which stands out like a sore thumb in our society. I'm excited to hear y'all's second part of your interview with him.
The adventure of going to campus with him was awesome because you didn't know what was going to happen exactly. And we got to encounter some really cool people while we were on the campus. But sitting down, talking with Chad on a park bench with students going by and all of that, and talking about what it looks like to hear from God for ourselves. And then, because God is an unselfish God and he's always about relationship, hearing from God for others, which I found really fascinating to talk about with him.
Well, let's listen to it.
Let's do it.
I want to hear everything. Play the tape.
So we've been thinking about this idea that part of the abundant life is listening really well to other people so that we're able to connect with them and help them. But the reality is we're all really needy people. I think we've come to realize we're all pretty needy. So we need friends that will listen and connect and help us. Yeah. One of the things we've seen in the church in America and one of the things people have really struggled with as Christians is listening to God, hearing God's voice. And I really think before we're able to help others and even help our friends, we have to allow God to connect with us and help us. Yeah. And so thinking about this idea of hearing God's voice, what will it look like when God begins to communicate with us?
I mean, man, I keep saying, man, that's because it's such a good question. It just means that we are more willing to include him in our story. And so it's like when we force something, like when we put pressure to something, like here we're trying to film this thing out against the elements, against the, in the elements maybe, there's a level of, okay, we're trying to make this happen, that it just feels challenging. But as we grow in the Lord, the times when he's spoken most profoundly through me are not because I was striving really hard to hear from him. I was just present and hanging out and not expecting anything, and all of a sudden I have a thought for someone or a feeling or an idea for someone that wasn't there before. And so I think it just starts with, Jesus, would you help me to feel your heart for others, to hear your heart for others, to know your heart for others, and help me to do that in a way that is actually from a deeper space in me than what would naturally come out apart from the help of the Holy Spirit. Yeah. So, but man, again, you guys are the kings of incredible questions. So, so thanks for rolling them out.
Part of this podcast and this movement, part of this podcast is asking questions that we want answers to.
I know, it's good. That's why they're so good. They're not like surfacey, shallow. So Chad, how long have you been a Christian for?
Exactly. So we're really asking questions like, man, what do I want to know now? But also going back to when I was first discovering the life of Jesus, what are the nitty-gritty parts of following Jesus, you know?
And I don't want to steal your thunder, but I feel like it's so often, it's when, I find that when communication has already begun, like, so if I'm checking out at a grocery store and my groceries are going through the conveyor belt, scanned into the bags, if I begin by asking the cashier what her or his name is, and then I begin asking them a little bit about their life, like, hey, how are you doing? You know, where are you from? Just little simple questions, then that is often the ground in which the Lord will work through for me to then say, well, I have this prophetic thought for you. Can I practice? Can I share it? I'm feeling this for you. Mm-hmm. Hey, do you have any pain in your like lower right side? You know, like all of a sudden, words of knowledge and profound spiritual gifts begin to flow simply because I've begun to ask someone about them and starting with their name. You know, like, hey, what's your name? What's your name? What's my name? That's such a beautiful starting point.
Yeah, I think Pez actually does a really good job of this. Anytime I'm at the supermarket with him, I feel like you always stop and talk to the person at the counter. And you are very intentionally listening to them. And I think a lot of times my goal is, how do I get out of here as fast as possible? Yeah. But anytime I'm with Pez, I remember, oh yeah, this is what it's about. It's actually being intentional with people and listening to them. And to be honest though, I feel like a lot of my generation in the church is very cynical. Right. Not just about God, but about life. I mean, and understandably so. I mean, we probably live in one of the most depressed, anxious times in the history of the world. But one thing I noticed about when I first started to learn to hear God's voice, and when He started to really just show up in crazy ways in my life, it was these times where I was moving away from cynicism to wonder. Yeah. This like from cynicism to like a childlike like anticipation for what the Father wanted to tell me or explain to me. And I wanted to ask you, in your life, what moves you from cynicism to wonder when it comes to hearing God's voice?
I love how you use the phrase cynicism to wonder, because that is so true. I mean, I think any time that I have experienced even a little bit of God in the secret place, in the quiet, the private, the like, you know, just like I'm going to hang out, I'm going to read the Word, I'm going to pray, I'm going to seek the Lord. As I begin to experience Him in that place, I find that my cynicism levels begin to lower, or my skeptic radar begins to lessen, and be maybe less sharp or less direct, and I'm able to maybe just bring whatever that is causing the skepticism or the cynicism, I'm able to bring it to light, and with the Lord in that secret place, to just be able to say, here's where I've struggled, you know, like I've prayed for this thing believing it was going to happen and it didn't happen. So I don't understand that, God. I'm angry at you. I'm like, when I went to buy a home in Nashville after moving from Seattle, I thought, okay, this is going to happen. This is going to be great. It's all going to work out. And it didn't. And so finally, after all of my energy was spent on trying to find a home, I had this like yelling match with God, a one-sided yelling match with God, which means it's all me yelling, you know, and just like, God, you're horrible, you're miserable, you're the worst, you don't know what you're doing, you don't care for me and my family. And of course, in that moment, nothing really changes, and I don't hear God audibly saying, Chad, you're wrong. That's not how I feel.
I mean, do you picture him just like doing a yo-yo?
Yeah, kind of. He's kind of, right, probably. Yeah, he's kind of like, oh man. He's like, no. No, he's actually listening is the beautiful part, and actually cares. But so the very next day is when our realtor says, hey Chad, I found this home on a hill that kind of fits the description that you've been talking about, and they just lowered the price by $100,000. So yeah, $100,000. And so then the next thing that happens is we look at the home, and we're like, okay, this is awesome. Like, this has what we wanted, and they just dropped the price $100,000. I'm all about the deal. So then we say, well, we'll offer you $20,000 less than the $100,000. And we just felt that was the price the Lord gave us. And so we ended up offering this deal. They took it. And so I was so mad at God, and I was skeptical about him as a provider, a father, someone who cared for me. I was angry at him. And then the very next day, he's like, maybe I held you back for 6 months because I wanted you to buy a home that would provide for you and your family, and you could get it for $120,000 less than what you would have thought. So, right, he's still doing the yo-yo, yeah. So, yeah, man. So I guess that's part of the wonder thing, is just coming to him, and being willing to stay in relationship, so to speak, or being able to stay close, even though it's like, what's going on here? I don't get it. I don't understand. So,
and I've experienced some of those times too, where I feel like God just doesn't show up. But I've come to the conclusion in my own life that I need other people to kind of stand in the gap for me sometimes. And there was a moment last year where I was in that place just yelling at God and so angry. I actually ended up looking up a Todd White thing on YouTube. It was like, I was just searching. I'm like, what do you do when you're really angry at God? And like something from John Piper came up, something from Todd White. I forget what he said, but I watched it. It was really helpful. And then I just called a friend and I was like, dude, this is what's going on. I need help. And just my friend praying over me, like the community of that somehow. I don't understand it. It's like a supernatural just covering of anxiety, letting other people in.
I mean, for me, recently, a very recent example that's very personal and very much in my heart was when, in this past December, my own dad died. So my dad had congestive heart failure for 10 years. And so believing for my dad's healing, praying for my dad's healing, entrusting my dad to God, and then not seeing him healed, supernaturally anyway, for sure, healed in the sense of he's forever with Jesus. So I'm not mourning so much right now, but I think that it was actually, I was dealing with a lot of bitterness, a lot of hardness in my heart, a lot of stuff, like a lot of anger, a lot of stuff bubbling over that I didn't even know why. And until I was able to say, wait, I'm pissed off at God for the fact that I prayed believing my dad would be healed and my dad died. That I'm angry at God. And then when I was able to just say that and like, God, I'm frustrated with you. I don't get you. Like, you asked me to believe in you and to trust you. And you say when we lay hands on the sick, they'll recover. My dad didn't recover. To be able to say that to God and then say, but still your word says to rejoice in the Lord always. And not just when your dad's supernaturally healed. And so then the Lord begins depositing a grace gift to rejoice in that, and a faith to believe for supernatural healings, even when you don't see it happening with someone so close to you and someone so dear to your life. So it's funny how like, I felt liberated of all that stuff. All those weird feelings and stuff are gone now, simply because I confessed it and talked to him about it. How do you feel like you handle this like from cynicism to wonder kind of transfer?
That is a crazy question to think about.
Yeah, dude. It's this guy over here that keeps firing them away. And this guy too.
Well,
you guys should meet each other sometime.
The first thing that comes to mind for me when it comes to cynicism, moving from cynicism to wonder, is nature. Like actually getting outside. And then the other thing is people. So I'm an extrovert. I'm a 2 on the Enneagram. Wow. And so I absolutely love people. I love being around people.
What's that title? The 2 is a
helper.
The helper.
Which,
cool.
I don't know if the title goes with my personality as much, but I'm
the
definitely
host.
Kind of the host. Yeah. And so I do wrestle with a heavy amount of fear when it comes to things like, man, what's it going to be like when my parents die, or that kind of stuff, and will I wrestle with anger? And I've come to realize at my age, I will wrestle with anger that. But I've also, as you guys were talking about, I was thinking about how healthy it is to acknowledge that, to actually acknowledge the anger. And I think you can't actually move from cynicism to wonder without actually grieving and going through that process. And I think that at this point, when you meet people that say they disbelieve in God entirely, it's actually not that. It's that it's unacknowledged and undealt with anger. Yeah. Because typically that person isn't filled with wonder about life at all.
True.
Right? They don't approach life that way in general because life is hard. There's a lot of things about it that are really hard. But for me, it really does come down to like getting outside, experiencing God, and outside of the everyday routine that sometimes just cracks it open for me, because I go,
Cool.
oh man, like, who are you, God, that you made all these things, and who am I that I would even question your plan? And yet I'm still angry. There's this scene in a movie that I talk about a lot with people. It's called The Apostle, and it came out in the 90s. And the only reason I saw it is because I was a huge Stephen Curtis Chapman fan, and he had a single that came out on the record. And so I bought the record, watched the movie
Did you
as
see
a
the
fanboy.
Stephen Curtis Chapman shirt he has from the 90s? It's like Stephen's head is
Nice.
like this big shirt.
Yeah. But there's this scene where the main actor is upstairs, and he's a kind of an itinerant pastor, and he's upstairs just pacing back and forth, and he's just like, God, I love you, but I'm mad at you right now, and he just starts going off, you know. And that was where I learned that it was actually okay, and that God isn't threatened by our anger, but it matters to him. It actually matters to him.
Yeah.
What would you suggest to someone who wants to create a rhythm of hearing from God on a regular basis? So, for example, put yourself in the shoes of someone who lives on this campus. And this could be any campus in the world. How do I create a routine of hearing from God regularly? Where do I start to do that?
Well, yeah, I think in some ways it's kind of piggybacking off of the answer that I gave for moving from skepticism or cynicism into wonder, which really is starting in the secret place. So I think before we publicly say anything, or we publicly pray for, or share prophetic words, or hear from God for others, we ought to be hearing from God for us. And so one of the things that's really helped me is sort of like journaling, practicing listening prayer by journaling. So just taking out, you know, we all have phones these days. So just taking out a phone and then like, okay, Jesus, is there anything you want to say to me right now? In my little like quiet time kind of thing, I'll practice this and I'll just wait and I'll just like, okay. And sometimes I'll wait longer than what I'd like to, but never has there been a time where I've come away like, dude, Jesus didn't say a thing to me. I always will be, and then I learned somewhere to just write the first thought that comes to your heart, or first thought that comes to your head, and so I'll just start writing, you know, like, okay, well, whatever it is, like maybe it's a Bible verse that comes to mind, maybe it's something like Jesus just, hey, I'm proud of you for the way that you handled this, or I'll just start writing as though God was writing through me, and just listening to what he's saying, and it's always very tender, it's very personal, it's very kind, it's very loving, and it's super encouraging. And so I've even used that on an airplane with somebody. If I'm sitting next to somebody, and I might be like, okay, you know, Holy Spirit, I pray you give me a word for this person, and then I'll just take out my phone. Sometimes I'll just pray that and then share whatever has come to my heart. But a lot of times I'll just take out my phone and then start the process of, okay, here's like stuff I've written down, and then I'll be like, hey, I was praying for you, and I felt like Jesus began sharing some thoughts with me. Is it okay if I share them with you? I love asking for permission, you know, when we share with people, rather than just like, yo, or I don't know, whatever, this is what God says. I think just saying, hey, this probably feels a little funny, might be a little awkward, but I feel like this is actually really important for you to hear. Can I share it with you? Can I have your permission? And once someone gives you permission, then you can say, well, here's, you know, I felt like you were dealing with, you know, whatever, these things, or you're really great at this, and then you begin reading it, and at the end I'll just say, hey, did any of that make sense to you? And usually they're like, yeah, that's super weird. How'd you know all that? Sometimes they'll be like, well, those two things were crazy, and then that one thing not as much, but, and then either way, it's an opportunity for, I think, just asking the question, how can I pray for you? And so when we're in life with people, not only when they're struggling, but just at any point, like, hey, how can I pray for you? Is there anything that you need prayer for today? Even if people don't yet believe in Jesus or don't yet have a relationship with him, most people are still open to the idea of receiving prayer and being prayed for. So, yeah.
So what I hear you saying is when God speaks to you in these situations, like on the plane or just in the supermarket, he gives you almost like a picture in your mind or a phrase or just a specific sentence for someone that you're sitting next to. Is that how it usually plays out?
Yeah, it usually is I would say it's sometimes either a word thought, like it's a thought that originates in my mind that is maybe just a simple word, leader. Just one word. So oftentimes when we say, God, give me a word for someone, we think like we need to have this crazy, elaborate, like 18 paragraphs worth of information over their life. Yeah. But oftentimes, if we just say, God, would you give me a word, a single word for someone, then it's a starting point that is, okay, usually the Holy Spirit builds off of that word. Okay, what about a leader makes sense to them? And it's like, well, they are pursuing leadership classes because they're in a blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden it's like begins, and you can, I think just starting with questions, like, hey, I see, one of the things that I learned along the way that's really helpful is finishing the prophetic statement, I see you as the kind of person who, and then it's just an opportunity for honoring someone. And I'm thinking, how do I outdo someone else in showing them honor? And so if I can just say, I see you as the kind of person who, and then maybe it just is a leader. And maybe that's just my starting point. And then I'll be quietly saying, Holy Spirit, would you like to add anything to that? And then whatever comes to my heart, I will say, I feel like you're taking some night classes about leadership, or you're really like at your workplace, you're being offered more leadership positions, and I just want to encourage you, you're doing great, and continue going into those, because God's really given you a gift for that. And man, can I just pray over you? And obviously I would ask him, does that make sense? And so I think that's simplifying the whole thing by saying, is there a word? Sometimes you're right, there's a picture that comes to me. I'm not so much a picture person. A lot of times I might get a sensation in my body while I'm talking to someone or before I've begun talking to them that is a word of knowledge for their healing. And then I just need to have the courage to say, hey.
It'd be like a sensation in like a part of the body.
Yeah.
They're probably
right. I think that's called a sympathy pain, or I think that's what it is. But just feeling what someone else feels, even for a moment, that kind of clues me into like, hey, they're dealing with breathing issues or some kind of heaviness. So
it makes me think of this word that I heard, just in Bible school or growing up in Sunday school. Mm-hmm. There are verses that talk about edification. And edification is kind of a funny word. You don't use it in normal life unless you're in a Bible study or something like that.
That's true.
It's kind of this idea of really blessing somebody.
Yeah.
And that, one thing that we talk about in our community a lot is that we are actually blessed to be a blessing to others. That's part of this like creative process that God put into us. And I love the way you're describing that, just like entering into their story with a word that has to do with their story, that calls them into everything that God made for them, which is what edification maybe is.
Right.
Like this idea that the gifts exist for, not just our own benefit, but for others as well.
Right.
Yeah,
absolutely.
There's something so cool when someone sees who you are. Mm-hmm. But not only that, it's like God sees who you are.
Yeah, he does.
Because God's speaking to that person about you. And I think that's what's really special about what you're saying. And I want to get better at that.
Yeah, me too.
I'm glad I get to learn from you and other people. Mm-hmm. I have some friends in my life who are just they're like in their 70s now.
Wow.
But they're just crazy followers of Jesus. Yeah. And everywhere you go with them. Like I was in an elevator with them one time and they're just like, that's a beautiful shirt. And then all of a sudden, God just opens this crazy salvation experience just by them connecting with somebody.
And that's a great example of ways, starting points with people is just complimenting people.
Yeah.
Like, hey, thanks for the way that you did that. Like if you're at a restaurant and your waiter or waitress takes care of you, then just honoring them at the end of your meal. Like, well, first of all, starting by asking their name. Hey, what's your name? Yeah. And then, hey, thanks so much for the way that you paid attention to my wife when she asked for the turkey burger without the turkey or without the burger. Thanks for paying so much attention. Or something where it's just like you're just honoring people. Man, thanks for being amazing. Thanks for who you are. Because when we begin to honor people, the idea, their hardness and their harshness against Jesus begins to dissipate a little. Yeah. And all of a sudden it's not us versus them. It's like, this person is showing me more respect than maybe anyone else has all day or all week or all month or all year.
Yeah.
So, and then when we say, look, I'm a follower of Jesus, and this is what he's teaching me, and this is what I'm learning, and I feel like he wants me to pray for you, that you would grow in this area or whatever, then the odds are they're going to be totally open to that because you've honored them and you've cared for them and you've shared your heart.
But if you leave a 10% tip after that,
That's true too.
because you
Or
did them
more.
a favor,
Right.
your message is gone.
Yeah, that's true.
You got to leave like a 25% tip.
That is true.
The abundant life, man. It's honoring. I love what you're saying. It's honoring people, and even in our communities. And I know Pez and I have gotten in some pretty crazy arguments the last few weeks.
Yeah.
But we honor each other. Like at the end of that argument, we're able to sit there and recognize the goodness in each other that God's put there.
Yeah,
and we're
that's
able
huge.
to overcome our differences. And I think that's so important what you're talking about.
But yeah, and that's a really interesting point, because when you said, it's not just about the 10% tip, you got the idea of honoring with our words and then honoring with our actions, which is that 20% tip or the 25% tip or the whatever. It's not. I think people are accustomed to, John 3:16 written on their little receipt, But it's like what they really need to know is that God loves them from someone who is loved by God and not just someone who can write John 3:16 down.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily wrong or bad, but typically people need to actually hear that, see it and experience it. And as they see it and experience it, it begins to take on a much different effect in their lives.
One of the things that we've talked about too is just this idea of the abundant life is something that when you meet somebody that's living it, you just know it. You start to experience it almost immediately.
Yeah.
But a lot of Christians aren't. And so, and yet we're trying to give away something.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're trained, I should do this, I should meet people, but I'm actually not experiencing the abundant life.
Right.
And I think it's important for us to actually get to the point where we realize, okay, I do need to listen to God first. I need to let him connect with me and help me before I can move on.
Yeah, no, that's a really powerful point, because if how are you? I'm great. Hey,
I
thanks.
like your hair.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. It's just practicing, practicing honor, and just even smiling at people, like with her walking by. Like so many people that walk by, I catch myself smiling at, because it's something it's a habit I've developed over time that I don't even think about. Like, and then I'll realize, oh, I'm just smiling at someone while you were talking to me, and or I was talking to you. I'm like, oh, I guess I should not smile. Stop smiling.
At people as I was talking. I was like, hey, cool.
Yeah, but it's one of the way that I've learned to discern from the Lord what He's doing, because oftentimes if I smile at someone and if I say hi and they say hi back, then usually there's the opportunity for a moment or an encounter with someone, and I think that's so. Just learning, because most of us in our own little worlds, so to stop and just start smiling at people is evidence of joy overflowing our hearts and into other people, even if it's the simplest form. That it didn't require Jesus loves you, here's the 18 things that Jesus wants to do in your life, and can I pray with you? Just a smile. So
It's a little thing.
just like trying when it's sometimes you try and it's like, in this kind of setting people assume my smile means I might be like, hey, come sit with us.
Come get interviewed on TV.
Right, and you can tell, cameras do change the dynamic pretty drastically over who feels comfortable and not. But anyway, so that's been cool, just smiling. It's hard for me to imagine Jesus not smiling, and smiling a lot. I think.
Thank you so much for joining us at UCF.
Yeah,
it's
cool to be here.
This
is my first ever time to record a podcast on location. I mean, I've never done a podcast anywhere that wasn't a office or a room or some kind of a studio setup. This out in a university campus is crazy.
Well, actually, this campus is really special. It is the largest campus in the United States. 70,000 students, close to 70, and it's actually where I started following Jesus for the first time. So my life just came alive in an explosion of meeting here. And I know Pez worked here for many years, and our thought is what would happen at places like this in the United States if people actually started listening to God,
Wow.
or learning how to listen to God's voice.
Yeah.
Like, what would these campuses look like because there's only about 3,000 to 5,000 Christians here out of 70,000. Wow. So what would happen if those 3,000 Christians were hearing God's voice every day and responding in obedience?
Right. It
That's
changes
our
everything.
dream. Yeah.
It's a beautiful dream. Sorry that I couldn't. I was like, come on, swallow, talk. Come on, body. But it's a beautiful thing to consider and to watch just how dreaming takes us into a higher place with God and a deeper place with God. It wouldn't take much for the 3,000 to 5,000 Christians that are here, if they became convinced that God was a talking God and would talk to them, to others. It would not take long before the 3,000 grew to 6,000 and 9,000, and all of a sudden it's crazy. So I think that there is something beautiful about just like that. What God's doing in our day is not so much the Billy Graham powerful evangelist, although those are awesome and it's amazing when God raises those people up, but that everybody can be a Billy Graham. Everybody in their own sphere of influence, in their own daily interactions with people, can have Billy Graham moments that most likely none of us will have a Billy Graham evangelistic crusade kind of thing, but we could have all kinds of impact simply by being here.
We were literally just talking about this. This was crazy. On Sunday,
That's so insane.
We were talking about how, because Billy Graham passed away this last week, and I think there's just, God put an honor in our hearts to really go back to some of the main videos that are on YouTube of Billy Graham and just seeing the impact he made on the world, and also
huge.
looking at people like Bill Bright and seeing what they did and honoring that and kind of stepping up on the foundation that they built and saying, hey guys, what they did is what we all can do. In our everyday lives. And I think that's something God's doing in our nation right now. Which he's teaching people, hey, Billy Graham is amazing and he's one of my children that I love, but you are too. And you have the same spirit that's in Billy Graham that is now in you as well.
And that's when Christians everywhere on planet Earth begin to realize that the same Jesus that was in Billy Graham is in them. It's a game changer.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us on your first ever on location
first
podcast.
Ever. I made it. I didn't die.
So Jeremy, what was the thing that stuck out the most from you from what Chad was sharing?
That's a good question, man. I really like his concept of honoring people as the gateway into conversation, prayer, anything. It's a step above being chivalrous. Is that how you say that? Chivalry?
Chivalrous.
It's a hard word to say.
It is.
Because it's not just for flattery's sake. It's actually finding something to encourage and honor someone with in a real sense,
Yeah, it's like the difference between do I merely want someone to buy something from me or agree with me?
Yeah.
Or do I actually care about them as a person?
Right. It's the idea of entering into a conversation in a way that you're trying to get something out of it from them, or entering into it so you can actually give them something more.
Yeah.
Which is awesome.
I was really blessed just to hear him talk about, in particular, the idea of it's okay to start with being angry with God if that's where you really are. Or not just angry, but it could be any emotion, frustrated.
Right.
Yeah, I think oftentimes we feel like that would be offensive to God.
Right.
And it is,
Yeah.
but he's not going to crush us for that, and he wants to meet us right where we're at. And I think that there's a lot of people who are angry with God, but they don't know that it's okay to work through that.
Yeah, I mean, to be completely frank, I'm not angry with God, but I'm in a spot where I'm kind of like Thomas. I'm doubting a few things. I'm feeling kind of the separation anxiety a little bit. But even to be encouraged that that's okay to come to God with that.
Yeah.
What an amazing gift that God still listens. Even though I'm not being 100% super Christian faithful and believing every single thing, that I can have an honest relationship where I'm not on 24/7. and that God still accepts me and wants to be near me.
Yeah, and then having the abundant life now
Yeah.
means that it's totally okay to be on the journey towards the abundant life. You don't have to perfectly have it all right now figured out.
Yeah. I mean, that's, to me, honestly, the best news. It is the good
such
news.
a relief.
Because sometimes I'll look at other people and be like, man, they got it. I'm blowing it.
Yeah.
You know, but we're all on a journey.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's okay to be honest with God with where you're at. And that actually helps usher in the abundant life.
Yeah, and a part of the abundant life is then giving it away, because if you're honoring the truth about where you're at with God, you are more able to honor the truth of where other people are and help them realize that that's okay.
Yeah.
And that God wants to meet them there and give them the abundant life too.
Right. It's like you actually don't want exactly what I have. You want what God has, and I actually want what God has for both of us. So we're on that journey together. So don't put me on the pedestal here. You know what I'm saying? But one thing too about Chad, so I met him after y'all interviewed him the night we hung out, I think at your house, and he actually, you know, it's funny, he was saying all these like kind of principles and practices that he does himself with people, and he did that for me. So we were talking in your kitchen, and he didn't know who I was. He didn't know I was going to be on this podcast. He didn't know anything. And he just stopped me. He's like, can I tell you what I think God is telling me about you? And I didn't know if it was some kind of like voodoo, strange magic or something, because I come from a very non-charismatic background. So this whole thing is still kind of, are you insane or are you a prophet? I'm not sure, maybe both, but that's the beauty of it, you know? And so I was like, yeah, man, I'd love to hear it. And this is kind of what he said. He said that I am going to do something in ministry that will not look like what other people have done before. That he said, I get this picture of a machete, and you're just cutting down this path for other people to follow. And he's like, it's almost like you're a radar constantly locked in with what's happening around you. And he's like, I think that's called the gift of discerning spirits. And so I kind of just stood there like, well, it's great to meet you too. Cool, man. Let's go sit on the couch, I guess.
Nice tattoo on your fingers.
Yeah, nice finger tats. But yeah, it was just something where, I mean, I took it, and I've been thinking about it since. And it was just something that was highly encouraging, but also something of depth where I'm really considering that, like, okay, Lord, are you speaking that to me through a fellow believer? And yeah, I mean, it's really challenging for myself to actually pause, listen. Does God have a word for me to give to someone else? Like,
well, here's the crazy thing is you've talked to him 3 times maybe in your whole life.
Yep.
You'd maybe met him once before or something like that, but years back.
Right.
And I can say, as a person that's known you for a while, I completely agree with what he said. There's nothing about what he said that doesn't strike me as true or heading in the direction of what your life is about.
Yeah.
You know, it's like forging a path for others and doing something that allows other people to kind of wake up and see the possibility of what God might want to do through them. So it's I think it's great.
Yeah.
Just the fact that he spent almost no time with you.
no time.
And has
Less
this
than 5
word from
minutes.
God that actually rings true.
Yeah, it's amazing, man. You know, I've actually the other day I told someone something about you that I think was from God. Because they're like, well, what is Pez like? We call him Pez, David Pizzoli. What's Pez like? And I was like, I really thought, and I took a second before I spoke, and I was like, you know, he's just exactly like a mad scientist and a pastor mixed together. Like, he's super willing to try anything for the sake of the gospel. And it could fail. It could blow up. It could completely work. It could be one of a kind. You just never know. But he's courageous enough to, like, step out of those boundaries where other people would be like, no, we know the guidelines of how to make certain recipes. And then Pez is in there, like, throwing all these different concoctions together, and you just never know what you're going to get, which is, for me, super fun.
Well, people are in for an exciting ride if they follow us anywhere, right?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. So thanks for listening. Man, we're thankful for Chad for being on our show. And we're also really excited about the future of this show. We have amazing interviews coming up.
Yes. So we're going to be coming out with some interviews that we got from Memphis during MLK 50. And it was just pure gold.
Oh, man. What a week that was.
Yes.
So we're excited to share it with you. Thanks for listening to us, and we'll catch you next Monday.